What's up, everybody? So today I'm excited to continue the story of the last days and final moments of Brushy Bill Roberts, who claimed to be Billy the Kid. Now, I've always said it exactly that way. Brushy Bill Roberts, who claimed to be Billy the Kid. And the reason I do that is for academic integrity. Do we really know for sure that he was Billy the Kid? No. I don't think we ever will know 100% for sure if he was actually the one and true only Billy the Kid. So to me, although I think it's likely he was Billy the Kid, I've never said it that way because I think we have to distinguish the academic process of trying to find the truth. We have to distinguish that from the roadside museum people that have this my dad is bigger than your dad mentality. And, we're friends of Pat Garrett and you're friends of Brushy Bill and he was a fraud and all this kind of moronic nonsense that comes from the roadside museum people. And I'm using the term roadside museum people in a very intentional way because you can go back over 100 years in history and see how P.T. Barnum and people like him, he was just probably the best at it, would shade the truth or downright lie for the purpose of entertaining people, really for the purpose of making money. A good example of that is General Tom Thumb, who was just a tiny little person, right? They used to be called midgets or dwarves. So he was just a very small person that P.T. Barnum said, let's call him General Tom Thumb and dress him up like Napoleon and have him act like a general. And this was novel and unique and funny and cool and interesting. And so he made tons of money off of General Tom Thumb. But I hate to break it to you, but General Tom Thumb wasn't really a general. If you want to get into the Wild West, Buffalo Bill Cody had the same type of acts in his traveling show. You'll sometimes hear people talk about Uncle Kit Carson, who claimed to be the real Kit Carson. And people use that to say, oh, this was a friend of Brushy Bill Roberts, and he's just an old fraud who claimed to be this famous person from history. He was a liar and a fraud. And they have no idea how idiotic that comment is. That's like me saying that Tom Cruise thinks he's a fighter pilot or thinks he's a bartender. Oh, he's just an old fraud, that Tom Cruise. He pretended to be a cocktail waiter, and then he pretended to have a Porsche in risky business, and he pretended to be a jet fighter pilot, and he never even went to Naval Academy. He didn't even serve in the military. It's like, yes, you freaking moron. He's an actor. It's a show. Uncle Kit Carson lived way after the real Kit Carson died. That would be like me pretending today to be the real John F. Kennedy. Like, how stupid can you be? Nobody really thought that Uncle Kit Carson was Kit Carson. Seriously. So you have people in the public, which I would understand, because, let's face it, most people aren't spending day and night researching this stuff, trying to understand it, trying to get into the academic nuances of, truth and reality of the Wild West and the story of Billy the Kid. It's just interesting. And so from an entertainment point of view, they tune in and tune out. And when you tune in and tune out, you don't get all the nuances. And that's why people use these stupid headlines like Brushy Bill's old family said he ain't Billy the Kid and all this stupid stuff that's completely not true. But to not understand the difference between Brushy Bill Roberts and his attorney, Mr. Morrison, pursuing a serious legal matter with the governor, and somebody like Uncle Kit Carson, who is playing a character in a Wild West show. By the way, how would Oliver Roberts, if Brushy Bill was Oliver Roberts, how would he know a professional performer in the Buffalo Bill Cody show unless he was with him? Like, he had a friendship. They wrote letters back and forth. How would he know that person if he's just a farmer, Oliver Roberts? Now, I'm going to give you another example, which is my favorite example. And that's that from August 17th, 1955 to 1970, in Frontierland at Disneyland, they had an Aunt Jemima pancake house. And if you were to go to Aunt Jemima's pancake house, you could meet the real Aunt Jemima, who obviously was played by characters. So they had many people play the character of Aunt Jemima over the years. But the one who did it for the longest period of time was an actress by the name of Aileen Lewis. And now you can imagine all the little kids that went to breakfast at Aunt Jemima's pancake house would probably look up at Aunt Jemima and say, what? Are you the real Aunt Jemima? And she'd say, oh, Lord, yes, honey, you know I was the real Aunt Jemima. Just like when you sit on Santa Claus's lap when you're a little kid and you say, are you the real Santa Claus? He says, of course I'm the real Santa Claus. So when you say to Uncle Kit Carson, are you the real Kit Carson? You know I am, son. I'm the real Kit Carson. So to try to use that as to say Brushy Bill was a fraud because he hung around with all these frauds that pretended to be people they weren't. Like, how idiotic do you have to be? And I'm not trying to be unkind, but we really have to separate. I get a lot of comments on our pages with these stupid talking points from people. So let me make it really simple. I'm going to divert from the academic integrity that I always maintain. And I'm going to tell you a secret. Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. 99% sure that Brushy Bill Roberts was the one true Billy the Kid from the 1870s, early 1880s. And I'm more convinced today than I've ever been because all of the arguments against Brushy Bill Roberts have been completely debunked and make no sense. And they continue to be repeated because they have nothing else. So they would say, Brushy doesn't look anything like the tintype. And then New York City Police Department facial recognition detective Michael Furia says they look like identical twins, using all the resources methodology that he uses in his daily job. And if you listen to the documentary that I did, he says, I was asking my colleague for additional help. So there were other people in the department that looked at this stuff, okay? None of them knew who Brushy Bill or Billy the Kid was because, and people are like, oh, how could they not know? Because he's an obscure Western character from 140 years ago that 20 and 30-year-olds could care less about. So people think this is like such a big thing. It's really not that big of a thing. But they look at it and said he looks like an identical twin. After that, you started seeing all these people say, well, you know, the tintype of Billy Kid is damaged. It's no good for comparison. And, you know, it's all warped and stuff. And so you can't really use that to compare. Okay, so we'll never know because you all of a sudden arbitrarily, single-handedly said, well, yeah, it's damaged. It was before it was that he doesn't even look like him. Now it's like, well, they're identical twins, but yeah, it's not a match. Another favorite of mine, William D. Wood, the Rough Riders. These guys say, oh, I found it. It's backwards. You know, the pictures is backwards and labels backwards. That's William D. Wood. That ain't Brushy Bill. Well, first of all, they used to say that the guy in the first photo and the guy in the second photo wasn't the same guy. Then I proved it was the same guy. You can look at their hands, look at the pinky ring, look at all this stuff. It's the same exact guy. Then they say, oh, it's the same guy. No, it's the same guy, but it's William D. Wood. And it matches authenticated photos of William D. Wood. There's no authenticated photos of William D. Wood. They literally make it up. And so you see people lie like crazy, completely illegitimate. So they have lost. Okay, it's over. The roadside museum people in the 80s, there's some people from Heiko that said, hey, we're going to start a museum. The people in Lincoln, when the people in Heiko came up with their roadside museum, was like, well, you ain't going to hurt our roadside museum. We got Billy Kid's hair and we got a official copy of the New York Times. It has a birth certificate saying Billy was born in New York City and Brushy Bill's a liar. Well, you know, hey, that's a fake New York Times article that you had, and they had to take it down. So this is people like P.T. Barnum for entertainment value saying that they have artifacts and relics and Billy Kid's rifle, and here's a lock of his hair, here's the shoes he wore, all this stuff. There's no provenance for any of this stuff. This is an entertainment value thing. That's what they do. It's not what we do over here. Hopefully you find these videos entertaining because I think it is fun to know the truth, but this is ultimately a effort to seek the truth. There may be a smoking gun that comes out that proves that Brushy Bill wasn't Billy the Kid. I don't think that's ever going to happen at this point. What I think you'll get is you'll get fake DNA, you'll get fake AI creations, fake letters. And what I've talked about in the past is some of the Brushy people were doing that before I came along. They may also be trying to do it now, but they were trying to say they had Morrison's tapes. I had this letter from Morrison, I had this and that. Well, when I made the breakthrough to work with Mr. Morrison's daughter, who's now passed away. That changed all that nonsense because I have the original stuff and I know what's true and what's not. And I've been sharing it on this channel. So again, that's Roadside Museum, people. Okay, so we're going to get back to Brushy Bill Roberts going to the governor of New Mexico. We've already shown you how Brushy wanted no publicity. They wouldn't reveal his name or where he lived. They had conditions to protect him from prosecution. They had conditions so that he wouldn't be harassed by the media. And the governor broke every single one of those promises. The governor misled them, tricked him by saying, we'll meet at my house and nobody will know, and all this type of thing so that he could get him in there, make a big circus out of it, deny him the pardon, and live happily ever after. But as I was thinking about this, I started wondering, why don't the people that think Brushy was a hoax or a fraud ask themselves why the governor took this meeting to begin with? So on the one hand, they'll say he had no evidence. There's no evidence. And, if you look at the evidence packet, it's just got some papers signed by these people and, they don't mean nothing. So one, sworn affidavits are your testimony under penalty of perjury. And the point was these people were available to be interviewed and questioned to get their full testimony. But here's a summary in a sworn affidavit presented to the governor. And then, of course, the governor didn't invite those people. He invited everybody else, sons of Pat Garrett, who had nothing to do with it, other people. But he didn't invite the witnesses who were there, like Severo Gallegos, who signed a sworn affidavit, didn't interview him, sent the media out to do a story on him, but had nothing to do with the legal proceeding. So they weren't included. But why did he take the meeting? If it's like, oh, hey, governor, look at this nonsense. This old fool, whoever he is, claiming to be Billy the Kid. So what happened when the Alcatraz guys, they got a letter, the U.S. Marshals got a letter saying, we made it that night, but barely. We've been living in South America. I've got cancer really bad. If you promise not to prosecute me, I'll turn myself in. What did the U.S. Marshals do? They said, yeah, we don't care. We're not interested. Don't want to meet with you. Don't want to talk to you. No, thanks. We're good. Right? That's what happened. I kind of wish they would have followed up on it and treated it seriously, but they completely dismissed it. And in their view, I'm sure they would say, we get a lot of letters like this, just a fraud. We're not interested. So why would the governor take the meeting? They didn't even want to meet with the governor. Brushy Bill and Morrison didn't even want to meet the governor. They said, act on the pardon based on this evidence, and we'll meet with you. Brushy Bill wasn't supposed to meet with him. The governor insisted on the meeting. So you could say the governor was so compelled by the strength of the evidence, he had to meet this guy in person, right? Why don't you say that instead of saying, oh, it's so stupid and it's just some signed paper and then it's got the history of Lincoln War and there's some newspaper articles and, it's just a big hoax. Not a big hoax. It's a big hoax. Why take the meeting? So the governor's a complete and utter dipshit is what you're saying. The president or whatever he was of the Supreme Court of New Mexico, this esteemed governor, this renowned guy whose judgment is impeccable, took a meeting with an old coot who had no evidence is because he said he was Billy the Kid around Christmas time after he had been sick for a week. So he had no faith that this guy was Billy the Kid. It's a big hoax. There was no evidence, zero evidence. Why would he take the meeting? He had to take the meeting? He doesn't have to take the meeting. He's almost done. He's got a couple weeks left in his governorship, like a month, like 6 weeks. Not even that, 4 weeks left in his governorship. Why would he take this meeting? These people make 0 sense. And when you look at the historical record, it's never, ever, 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 ever what they say it is. Ever. So at this point, Brushy was probably Billy the Kid. And in saying it differently, Billy the Kid lived on and later became known as Brushy Bill Roberts. Is probably the right way to say it. So I promised you a few things and I'm going to share those with you now. First, I'm going to share with you the transcript of the audio tape between Brushy Bill Roberts and Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison interviews Brushy after the debacle at the governor's mansion, and I want you to hear their dialogue as they speak with one another. Unfortunately, I don't have the whole thing. This was in Mr. Morrison's papers, and it's a partial transcript. It's not a full transcript, but I'll give you what I got. Here we go. Mr. Morrison begins by saying, well, Billy, we had a conference with Governor Mabry yesterday, didn't we? Yes. What do you think about that conference? And Brushy says, I don't think anything about it for the way they done. What do you mean by the way they done? Well, he said he wouldn't have nobody in there except just him. And he had the whole house full. The stenographers and every man that wanted to write and talk. That's the way it ended up. Ain't that right? What did you see? You talked to Governor Mabry in his study while you were lying on his bed for about 20 minutes in private. So see, that tells me Morrison wasn't in there. And then, if I recall, he brought you out through the hallway into a large room with a large round table. Yes. When you walked out of his study, of course, you weren't feeling well. No, I was might near dead. Because he had a stroke. He had a transient ischemic attack, which is a stroke. You looked over there, and what did you see? What did you see in that room when you walked through there? About 40 or 50 men. Well, was there anybody in particular that you noticed? I seen 2 men standing each side of the door with 6-shooters on. What did they look like? Well, I figured they were government men of some kind. They kind of looked like state rangers in Texas the way they were dressed, with 6-shooters on. You didn't expect to see those type of men in there, did you? No, those photographers either. You didn't expect to see the photographers? No, they weren't supposed to be in there. Well, what effect did that have on you, if any? Well, it sort of unnerved me all over, of course. Then he made me acquainted with the sheriff over there. He said, you do know this man from Carlsbad? I said, no, I never did see him. He said, well, you were in that country about 6 months ago. Did you meet him when you was over there? I told him, no, I didn't meet him. Then he asked you, well, then who did you go see over there in Carlsbad? And that's the end of the transcript. I do continue to hold out hope. One day these tapes will be heard, and I've been working on that for, 5 or 6 years now. So we'll see what happens. You have to understand that every time I reveal anything, there are people that try to worm their way in and find out where I got it, who's got it, and how they can get it. When I was working with Mr. Morrison's daughter, I confided in a guy because my promise was I would never come out publicly, but I confided in a guy that I had spoken to her and that I knew where the audio tapes were. Well, a few weeks later, I get a call from Miss Morrison, who's in her 90s, and she said a guy called and said he's working with you and he's coming by tomorrow morning to pick up the tapes, the audio tapes. She goes, is he working with you and did you send him? And I said, I didn't send him because you don't have the audio tapes. And she goes, yeah, I was confused why he would say that because they're not here and I don't have them. So these people think they're so slick and they lied and literally tried to send somebody to Miss Morrison's house who's in her 90s, and they're trying to take advantage of this old woman and try to get Mr. Morrison's tapes. All the while, she didn't have the tapes. She told me who to talk to, and they had the tapes. Not anywhere close to where she was. So forgive me, but that's just how it is right now. I'll continue to release stuff, though. Don't worry. So as you can see from the transcript that was in Mr. Morrison's papers, everything he put in alias Billy the Kid is exactly the way it happened. Now, Mr. Morrison was very thorough, and he actually took it a step farther. And that same day, before Brushy goes back to Texas, the day after the meeting with the governor, Mr. Morrison wants to set the record straight so he can begin his work to take Brushy Bill's case to the next governor. And so they discuss a whole lot of things. Now, interestingly, on that very same day, there was another woman present who was familiar with Brushy Bill Roberts. And her name was Catherine. I'm going to leave off her last name, and I just explained why. I can't share everything. But I'm going to share with you that after Brushy Bill died, Mr. Morrison went back to this lady who was present on December 1st and got her to swear an affidavit on everything that happened on that day. And I'm going to read part of it to you now. The affidavit says, before me, the undersigned authority on this day personally appeared Catherine, who upon her oath deposes and says that her name is Catherine, that she is of lawful age, that she was personally acquainted with W.H. Roberts, also known as William H. Bonney, Billy the Kid, the Texas Kid, the Hugo Kid, Brushy Bill Roberts, and O.L. Roberts, who is now deceased. This affiant further states that she was present together with Mrs. William V. Morrison and another person whose name has been redacted, at the residence of William V. Morrison on December the 1st, 1950, at which time they witnessed a recording in which William V. Morrison interrogated the said William H. Roberts, alias William H. Bonney, with reference to the meeting with Governor T.J. Mabry, Santa Fe, New Mexico, on the preceding day, and with reference to the life and happenings of said Roberts, alias Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, that the said Roberts acknowledged certain facts of his family history and lifetime happenings, that he also admitted the ownership of 5 certain and definitive diary books in the possession of William V. Morrison, which books he identified. And he admitted that certain alterations had been made by him and Mr. Morrison to correspond with and represent the true facts as they should be, that certain dates and names had to be changed for the reason that said Roberts had been covering up certain facts during his lifetime to withhold his true identity through fear of apprehension for crimes he had committed as William H. Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, in New Mexico. Whoa, horsey. We talked about last time when Brushy Bill went before the governor, he was asking for a pardon, not a pardon for being Billy the Kid. He was asking for a pardon for murdering the sheriff of Lincoln County, William Brady. He's saying, I was convicted of killing William Brady, and I want a pardon for that conviction. He actually wasn't admitting he killed him. He said, I was convicted to die, and I want a pardon. So he was claiming the death sentence of Billy the Kid. Very important. Let's pretend to be murderers and see if we can get hung. That's a great idea. Not any chance in Hades that somebody would be stupid enough to come forward and claim a death sentence, knowing that if they did prove their identity, that a possible outcome was that they would be executed by the state of New Mexico. Let's use a little common sense here, folks. But why this affidavit is important is it shows primary evidence that Brushy Bill was trying to cover his tracks. And in the 5 certain and definite diary books in the possession of Mr. Morrison started to go through and started to try to clear up some of that stuff. Okay, very important. The affidavit continues. This affiant further states that the said William H. Roberts identified a certain sheet of paper which had been removed from a book that had been subsequently misplaced, that the letters OLR and the year 1931 appeared at the top of the sheet, which had attached thereto, at the bottom thereof, a heading of the El Paso Times dated Tuesday, April 4th, 1950, with the hand-printed letters O.L. Roberts. Now, I don't know what that has to do with anything, but we're about to find out. That the said William H. Roberts admitted that all the above mentioned printing had been made by him, that a certain black book, loose leaf notebook titled The Book and Private Life of Brushy Bill was wrote in 1925 and containing certain number of sheets of paper written in script in certain writing medium. Sorry, I got to kind of protect some of this stuff because people will fake stuff. And I don't want to get into these details because it will identify these books as being authentic or inauthentic, and nobody has this but me. So for the sake of objective, truthful research, and because I know how these people operate, I can't share this. But it goes on to say that he wrote a certain age, which was also written by him to cover his true and correct age in withholding his true identity, that there appeared on a certain sheet a list of names, including Pawnee Bill, Texas Jack, Buffalo Bill, with the notation on the bottom thereof, yours truly, Brushy Bill, all of which was admittedly written by him, and he admitted that he had formerly worked with all of those men whose names appeared thereon, which would explain why Pawnee Bill went looking for Billy the Kid, because otherwise Pawnee Bill would have never even known Billy the Kid. Why would Pawnee Bill be looking for him? Unfortunately, Pawnee Bill, Gordon Lilly, was in a auto accident, or else I think this could have been solved before any of us were ever born. Anyway, I think he's trying to establish handwriting here so that he could do a handwriting comparison between Brushy Bill and Billy the Kid's letters. Anyway, this affiant further states that the said William H. Roberts identified the following described books as being the original diary books concerning his life and he identified the following mentioned articles and pictures. So he goes through and says, here's all my notebooks, and here's photos of certain people and things, all again speaking to the fact that Mr. Morrison was gathering his evidence. If they were tinkering and like, let me rewrite this, whatever, then they wouldn't get an affidavit on it to say, hey, let's be above board. Let's get you on audio tape. Let's make sure that we're clear, that we didn't have time to pull all this together before. We're going to get it straight now. Okay. You're going to see more evidence of this in their private correspondence, which I will get to. Affidavit continues. The said William H. Roberts identified a certain old scarf as being the same scarf which was given to him at Fort Sumner, New Mexico in December of 1880 by a Navajo Indian woman, and he stated that he had given the Indian woman a tintype picture of himself, copies of which have been made by many people throughout the years. He further states that the sheriff, Pat F. Garrett, took a .44 single-action Colt six-shooter from him at the time of arrest at Stinking Springs in December 1880, that he never fired anything other than a .44 caliber pistol, that Garrett took a .41 caliber double-action six-shooter from the body of the man purportedly killed in Fort Sumner and passed as the body of William H. Bonney on July 14th, 1881, that he always fired the rifle with his left hand. This is super important because I pointed out that you look at the tintype. Yes, it's reverse. We're not idiots. We know it's reverse. These people that, because it's new to them, oh, it's reverse. You got to look at the other side. Because it's new to them, they think it's new to everybody. Okay. Yes, the tintype is reverse. I'm not making fun of the general public. I'm making fun of specific people that are stalkers. So anyway, if you look at that tintype, correctly oriented, the pistol of Billy the Kid is on his right hip in that photo. And he's holding the barrel of the Winchester in his left hand. Winchester 1870, 1873. Now, Brushy Bill said that when that photo was taken, he had just come off of a cattle drive, which means he would have been mounted. And generally, when you're mounted on a horse, your primary battle weapon is going to be your rifle. And I always speculated that the reason his pistol is on his right hip is because his primary battle weapon is the rifle, and he's shooting that left-handed. So if you're engaged, if you ever shot a rifle, imagine holding the rifle left-handed, you're shooting. You're going to release the barrel with your right hand, right? Drop your right hand, grab your secondary weapon, pull it and fire that. So I often speculated that, yes, he was left-handed. He's actually ambidextrous, but it doesn't prove he was right-handed because his pistol is on the right side of his hip. I've never heard anybody else say that but me, so tell me if I'm wrong. But again, the pistol being on his right hip is because the rifle is his primary weapon. He's shooting that left-handed, and then he can access his secondary weapon, his backup weapon, which is the pistol. There's interviews where I think it's Amelia Church, where she's talking about did he use a pistol, and she goes, no, he used a gun, and because the primary or something like that, because the rifle was the primary weapon. So anyway, I just personally think that's interesting. The other thing is he may have a second pistol that you can't see behind his sweater. So maybe he's got two guns. They say, that, nobody ever had two guns in Wild West. That's a fantasy. That's a Hollywood myth. Okay. The cops have backup guns that are hideout guns. He could very well have a gun in his waistband or a gun, on his side and then, in his waistband as well, or he could have two guns. Just nonsense. I don't believe any of that stuff. I'm like, oh, nobody had two guns. Of course you did. Jesse James had those ball and cap pistols, and he had like 12 of them all over his body. Okay, I exaggerated, but you get the point. You'd have as many on your scabbard and your saddle and all over the place if you were guerrilla fighters. If you read about Mosby's guerrillas and you read about all the other guerrilla Civil War guys, they had freaking ball and cap guns stuffed everywhere they could stuff one, of course. Nope, you only get one, partner. Can't go into battle, and shame on you. You broke the rules. You got more than one gun. Like, let's not be idiots here. Seriously. Okay, this affidavit further states that the said Roberts identified picture number one. Okay, I can't get into this, but these are all the different photos that he had. And he said, these are the different people that are in these photos. This is me, whatever. So again, gathering evidence. Affidavit further said that said William H. Roberts, alias Billy the Kid, described the interview with Thomas Mabry, governor of Santa Fe, on the preceding day with reference to obtaining a pardon for offenses committed against the territory of New Mexico. as promised by Lew Wallace, territorial governor in 1879, that during the interview he was fearful of apprehension by the state officers and the sheriff of Carlsbad, all of whom were present, that he was so nervous and excited during the interview that the governor that he could not think nor recollect coherently until queried about the kind and type of teeth he had in the Lincoln County days, date of extraction, etc., which facts he explained to the group of historians, news reporters, private individuals, relatives of Garrett and McKinney, etc. So that's interesting. We always wonder what happened in the room, but Brushy Bill talked in detail about his teeth and when they were extracted and all that. He also had them in a jar, and you'll see that here in a minute. He also said that when the governor introduced the sheriff among the people present in the room, his nervousness grew to the extent that he thought the sheriff would arrest him if the state officers did not, as had previously admitted to the governor that he had visited in Carlsbad several months before the interview. He thought that some of the officers would put handcuffs on him as soon as he would start to leave the conference table for passing through Carlsbad. He said that the governor promised him a private interview, but when he entered the mansion, he saw several people, that he was introduced to two sons of former Sheriff Pat Garrett, a son of Kip McKinney, and Kip McKinney having been a member of Garrett's posse in December 1880 when they killed Tom O'Folliard, a cousin of Kip McKinney, that he saw many newspapers and photographers, none of whom were supposed to be present, that he did not expect to be intimidated by any of the above mentioned people, and he was promised a private interview by Governor Mabry, that he did not think he had received a fair trial at the interview. Okay, that is an affidavit from Mr. Morrison's files describing what he and Brushy Bill worked on the day after the disastrous governor's meeting. Okay, so Brushy Bill goes back to Texas. Now, he is a very sick man. He actually has a coronary occlusion, which is a blockage of his arteries. That is why whenever he's at the governor's mansion, he gets excited, his heart starts pumping, he starts burning a lot of oxygen, his heart can't keep up, and he has a mini stroke or a transient ischemic attack. As his heartbeat goes down, he's able to recover a little bit, but he is not a well guy. This is going to kill him less than 30 days later. Okay, so Brushy Bill goes back to Texas and he goes to see his doctor, and his doctor tells him, you need to lay down and be in bed or you're going to die because your heart cannot take any more excitement. So Brushy Bill actually writes to Mr. Morrison and tells him that I've seen the doctor. Doctor says I'm not well. Doctor says I need to stay in bed. And what should I do? Because all these local reporters are coming to my house nonstop. And they're telling my wife that I'm a traitor to my community, that I won't give interviews when I gave an interview to all the reporters in the governor's mansion. And why can't they just talk to me? And I don't know what to do. And now, again, this is just a few days after the meeting at the governor's. So on December the 4th, 1950, Morrison has gotten Brushy Bill's letter and he writes him back. And there's a few interesting things in this letter. But one of the first things that Mr. Morrison writes is going to expose another lie of the media in New Mexico. Because if you remember last time, the media in New Mexico basically tried to portray it like the law firm of Andress, Lipscomb, and Petticolas, whatever, didn't want anything to do with Mr. Morrison. Like, this is just a guy that came to us. He wanted us to do some paralegal paperwork, and we did it. We don't know this guy. We're not involved with this guy. We want nothing to do with this. You know, Mr. Morrison's our client, not Brushy Bill. This was a transactional type thing. So go back to the other video. You can see as you read through, it's like they haven't had contact with Mr. Morrison. They don't know anything about it, blah, blah, blah. Completely untrue. Mr. Morrison had worked very closely with multiple law firms, including R.F. Roberts, who was a cousin of Brushy Bill Roberts. His own family didn't think he's Billy the Kid. Total lie. R.F. Roberts, who's an attorney that worked on this case, is a cousin of Brushy Bill Roberts, who thought he was Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid's wife, Brushy Bill Roberts' wife, thought he was Billy the Kid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's never, ever, ever what they say, but forgive me for going fast. But anyway, here's the letter. Dear Billy, I just talked to Ted Andress and we decided that you may admit that you are Billy the Kid. Don't talk too much, but don't be afraid to say that you are the kid. So wait a minute. Ted Andress, the lawyer who submitted the petition, is still involved. They just had a conference and decided legally, legal decision, that you can admit that you're Billy the Kid. What? I thought there's a big fraud, and I don't know this guy. He wanted me to do this paperwork for him. So it's a transaction. We took his money, we did the paperwork, whatever. We're done. We have nothing to do with it. Total malarkey. Total malarkey. They continue to try to frame it as a hoax, and these people weren't serious and it wasn't really a reputable law. Total nonsense. Just talk to Ted Andress. We decided you may admit you're Billy the Kid. Don't talk too much, but don't be afraid to say that you're the kid. I'm sending you copies of letters I just answered. If you have the name and address of Travis's sister in San Angelo, I'd like to have it. DeWitt Travis. Again, gathering evidence. We have not written to Governor Mabry yet. However, I do not think we will ask for another consideration. I had no idea he would rely upon the answers to the foolish questions. After the interview, he promised he would consider the evidence, but he changed his mind again. Wait a minute. Papers say Governor Mabry came out. Oh, I am the governor. I have a proclamation for all the people. I am not now nor ever pardoning this man because I do not believe he is Billy the Kid. That's what they said in the papers. But what is Morrison saying here? After the interview, Mabry promised he would consider the evidence, but he changed his mind again. And he asked a news reporter to stop the first reporter from making the first report that he gave to me. So he had a first report. Remember, he was trying to see which way this was going to go. I got the El Paso Centennial. This could be a really good thing. I could, see what I can get out of this thing. He had, just like Pat Garrett, he had a first report, and then he pulls it back and goes with what we know the papers went with. But according to this, December 4th, 1950, primary evidence from Mr. Morrison's archive, he asked a news reporter to stop the first reporter from making his first report that he gave to him. I believe that we should have had an opportunity to interrogate Cliff McKinney, Oscar Garrett, Will Robinson, and the great Pat Hurley, since they were permitted to interrogate you without our permission. Certainly none of them ever knew Billy the Kid, and probably none of them could remember much about Pat Garrett. Yesterday, I was informed by an El Paso businessman that Pat Hurley was an Oklahoman and not a New Mexican. Remember Patrick Hurley, General Patrick Hurley, this very esteemed guy? He's an expert on New Mexico. He's a complete fraud. He's not a New Mexican. He's an Oklahoman. I don't know if that's true. We can look it up, but that's what somebody told Mr. Morrison. All I know is he went to a hot dog supper and spent a whole day, and he only gave Brushy Bill a few minutes. Anything that he might have known about the kid must have been obtained from hearsay only. Certainly his kinsman, who had fought against the kid in the Lincoln County War, did not have an opportunity to tell Pat about the kid. John Hurley, the kinsman of Pat, was killed in the mid-'80s. I had copies of indictments against John in my briefcase, and I had copy of his pleading to the governor's amnesty in bar of prosecution for murder. I doubt if Pat knows about this. However, I would have enjoyed asking Pat a few questions. So the great General Patrick Hurley, an expert on Lincoln, New Mexico, because my people fought in that war. I grew up with the people that fought in that war, and they told me all about it. Well, apparently he was too young because his guy that fought in that war died in the 80s. Come on, man. These people. Ugh. I promised Governor Mabry certain things in reliance upon his promises to us, and I believe that I had a right to expect that he keep his promise with us. I am not satisfied with the results of the interview. My plan is to refile the petition with Governor Ed Meacham after he takes office next month. I believe that Meacham, a former FBI agent, will consider all the evidence in the whole matter. Why is he talking about evidence? This is a huge fraud. He made it all up. They just want to be famous. Why is Morrison so focused on evidence? Because it's not a fraud, and these people have lied to you and lied to you and lied to you. The Garretts claim that their father killed the kid, but there is no evidence to prove that he killed anyone that night in July at Maxwell's house. All we ask is a fair hearing on all of the evidence. Hope that you made the trip back home all right and that you are feeling better by this time. Yours very truly, Mr. Morrison. Okay, so again, here's the reality of what happened. Governor Mabry didn't make this big proclamation, I am not now or ever, because I don't believe this guy's big. It didn't happen, according to this. He said, "Let me think about it, guys. I'll get back to you. I promise I'll look at the evidence." And he never did. Then he told the newspaper people what to write, and they completely screwed over Mr. Morrison and the gang. Of course they did. Okay, so I want to take a minute and talk about the man whose name appears on the petition for pardon ahead of Brushy Bill Roberts. And that man is attorney Ted Andress. Now, remember, the people that are lying to you would have you believe that this whole thing was a stupid fraud. It was a big hoax. There was no one credible involved. No one ever questioned Pat Garrett. They didn't believe Brushy Bill Roberts. He was an old kook. But what do I always say? And I'm not even going to say it. But when you look at history, it's never what they say. So I want to introduce you to the man named Ted Andress. And I'm going to start with a shocking newspaper headline from 1959. Because on January 29th in 1959, Ted Andress was murdered in the international terminal of the El Paso airport. And this murder was the biggest story in El Paso for quite some time. If you want to know why it was the biggest story, is because Ted Andress was an extremely prominent attorney in El Paso. Mr. Andress was a senior partner in the law firm of Andress, Lipscomb, Pellicolas, and Fisk. He was a member of the school board, and he was a very, very prominent citizen in El Paso. And this story deserves its own video, but it's so crazy that I got to tell you the whole thing. Apparently, there was a doctor in El Paso named Idenoff. And Dr. Idenoff, I think, had gone through a divorce and had had some financial trouble, and there was some litigation involved. And Ted Andress was one of the attorneys, I think, suing Idenoff. So apparently, for some reason, and I think it was to kind of impugn the character of Dr. Idenoff. Again, this was a kind of a divorce situation where there's money missing or whatever. And so they had to talk about the character of Dr. Idenoff. And in that context, Ted Andress introduces to the court a nude photo of Dr. Idenoff. And in studying this for a while, it looks like, he was trying to embarrass him. He was trying to impugn his character, and he was basically just trying to win the case. That's what lawyers do. And I think he did win the case. But this doctor, Dr. Idenoff, was an absolute nutbag. And he is convinced that there is a conspiracy of prominent people in El Paso and probably the world that are out to get him. And so he's treated for being this paranoid nutcase, actually committed to an asylum, and then finally one of the senior doctors actually releases him from the asylum against the advice of the other psychiatrists. So what does Idenoff do? He goes and gets a gun and he stalks Mr. Andress. He finally confronts him and his wife at the airport, where he shoots him dead right there in the international terminal of El Paso airport. Now, hopefully I don't have to tell you why that's interesting. There's a whole lot in this story that's super interesting. So more importantly is why it's relevant to the story of Brushy Bill Roberts. So first of all, as you can see, this is front page news, and it says former EP El Paso physician kills Ted Andress. Now, the first thing that stands out to me, is there anything interesting about that headline? Wouldn't your first question, if you didn't know anything about El Paso, be, who the hell is Ted Andress? Right? It doesn't mention Dr. Idenoff. It says former El Paso physician, generic, kills Ted Andress, not generic. Why? Because everybody knew who Ted Andress was. He was a very prominent attorney in El Paso in 1959 and prior. And this whole newspaper is pretty much about this case and about the death of Ted Andress. But if you go down to the middle of the front page, there's a little section that says doctors battled for life. And the reason I want to share this with you is this shows you how prominent of a citizen that Ted Andress was in his community. And the article reads, the doctors, the city's finest, came from nowhere. They clustered in the plaster-cracked halls outside of El Paso General Hospital emergency room and talked in low tones, while those of them who first arrived fought for the life of lawyer Ted Andress. Get that blood from the blood bank down here fast, said somebody in the cramped, crowded emergency room. 4, make it 5 of O negative. Plainclothes policemen mingled in the crowd. Ambulance driver W.R. Bain, a detective off duty, told about the rush of getting the mortally wounded attorney to the hospital. A man raced in the emergency entrance with a box of 6 pints of blood already opening in his hands. Eager doctors, interns, and nurses reached. "I've got it," the man cried, handing out the bottles. It was 7:02 p.m. They put 3 pints of blood on the hangers above the narrow, hard-padded emergency table. "I have an artery here," a doctor said. They pulled the little plastic tubes from the bottles in each of Andress's ankles and one of his arms. The blood did not flow. Then they began to pump the blood with little bulbs like they had on old-fashioned bicycle horns. The blood began to trickle through the tubes into the pasty white man. Down the hall, Mrs. Andress was in another room, under sedation, but still suffering from the terrible shock of seeing her husband gunned down. Detective Joe Gonzalez in the hall could hardly realize he had failed to recognize the assailant as Dr. Harold Idenoff, longtime bitter enemy of Andress. "He had on his work clothes and I didn't recognize him," Gonzalez said. A resuscitator was working on Andress now, breathing for him, trying to force the life to stay in the man's body. In sudden stillness in the hall, the resuscitator made irregular, patterned sucking noises. More doctors came, the cream of El Paso medicine, and others, lawyers, civic leaders, women friends of the nerve-wracked Mrs. Andress. Detective Gonzalez took an envelope from his pocket and produced the pieces of the watch which had been on Andress's wrist. He pointed to what had been the back of the watch. It was bulging irregularly and one side of it was torn out. From there, a bullet went into his wrist, the officer said. Lieutenant Roy Moyer shook his head slowly. Captain Ted Vogel leaned on a wall in the hall and talked over the telephone. So you have the chief, the lieutenant of the police, and the captain of the police all there because Ted Andress was a prominent citizen and they all wanted to be there for him. Like fires up a dry canyon full of pine trees, the fantastic, incredible news flashed through El Paso. Mrs. Thelma West, EPGH switchboard operator, parried calls away from the emergency room where the doctors fought with death. "El Paso General," she would say. "No, I cannot give you a report yet. No, the doctors are too busy. I'm sorry." The calls would continue far into the night. As the blood trickled out of the pints above Ted Andress's hard padded cot, they were replaced with fresh ones, and the new blood was pumped in by eager hands, but it was not sucked into the arteries by his heart. Long before the doctors officially pronounced him dead, no movement of the inert body could be seen, the head tilted down and the feet up on the adjustable table. A doctor who had arrived too late to help puffed a cigarette in the room just off the emergency room. "They're using oxygen, doctor," reminded Alderman Ted Bender. The alderman was there also, who had been one of the first arrivals and who had been the first sent for the blood bank blood. Then it was over, and even the doctors admitted the fight was lost, and an angry, stunned silence spread through the hall. "He's gone," they said. "He died." Or he didn't make it. They told Mrs. Andress then, and she cried hysterically without control, surrounded by friends who could not do anything because nothing would help. On the switchboard, Mrs. West started saying, "Yes," at 7:24 p.m. "Yes, Mr. Ted Andress, yes." So that, my friends, was the scene in the last days and final moments of Ted Andress. And I'm only sharing that with you to illustrate that William Vincent Morrison, who the idiotic newspaper said was a salesman, he's just a salesman, and he just ordered, this stuff from a law firm, and they just did it for him, like paralegal work, and here's a big hoax, it was a big fraud. No, he had Ted Andress, R.F. Roberts, later on C.L. Sonneson, the University of New Mexico Press, Harry S. Truman, the President of the United States. This was not a hoax. How long are we going to let people lie to us and say stupid things that are obviously debunked by the historical record? I know how long I'm going to do it. Never again, because it's a complete waste of time. So just to put the flourish on the end of the word prominent, allow me to read you one more section of this. First of all, there's a photo of Mr. Andress, and it says, "Attorney killed. Theodore Andress, prominent El Paso attorney and president of the local and state school board groups, was shot to death Wednesday night at an international airport. Dr. Harold Idenoff was charged with murder and malice in the death." So he was not just president of the local school board group. He was president of the state of Texas school board group. He's a big host, and he didn't want nothing to do with it, and he was. What did Morrison say in his letter? I spoke to Ted Andress today, and we decided it's okay if people know you're Billy the Kid. Does anybody even look at the historical record before they go out to the public and start saying stupid things? I guess they don't. Slain attorney is prominent in El Paso and the state of Texas circles. Theodore Andress, who was shot to death Wednesday night, was one of El Paso's respected citizens, an attorney here since 1931. So by the time he went in front of the governor with the petition for pardon, he wasn't there. He sent the petition with Mr. Morrison, who was an attorney. He had been practicing law for 19 years. He has held offices in numerous civic organizations and had devoted much of his time in recent years to school board work. Andress was elected president of the Texas Association of School Boards last October. He had served on the El Paso Board of Education since 1950. He was a member of the law firm of Andress, Lipscomb, Petticolas, and Fisk. He came to El Paso in 1916 when a year old. He graduated from Alta Vista School in 1921, from El Paso High School in 1925, and El Paso Junior College in 1927. He obtained his LLB degree from the University of Texas in 1931 and entered law practice here. In 1941, he was named city attorney, having served as assistant the previous 2 years. He was awarded the Junior Chamber of Commerce Distinguished Service Key as the most outstanding young man of El Paso for 1941. Among his many civic activities, he had served as a director of the El Paso County Bar Association, El Paso Kiwanis Club, and the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and held membership in the Owls, Elks, and Masonic Lodges, American Legion, and Veterans of Foreign Wars. He was a member of the El Paso Bar Association and the State Bar of Texas. Andress headed the Red Cross Drive in 1947. He was elected Kiwanis president in 1948 and was president of the Southwestern Sun Carnival Association. In 1953, he also had been head of the City County Child Welfare Board and had held offices in the Boy Scouts of America, District Board, and Texas Western College ex-students. During World War II, he served 42 months as an officer in the Navy and had a reserve commission. He was named Outstanding Citizen of the Year in El Paso for 1953, and he was presented a plaque by the El Paso Board of Realtors. He was elected president of the El Paso Bar Association in 1955. He was elected president of the El Paso Bar Association in 1955. Now, hold on a second. You think that someone like this, who is a member of the El Paso Bar Association and the State Bar Association of Texas, wouldn't object if Mr. Morrison was fake, calling himself a lawyer? He wasn't a real lawyer. He's a used car salesman or whatever. He's a merchant. I mean, you don't think that Ted Andress would say, hey, Bill, kind of probably shouldn't be calling yourself a lawyer since you're not. Like, obviously, they were still in touch after the governor's meeting. Obviously, they were in touch before the governor's meeting. So does any of this sound off to you guys? It should, because you've been lied to over and over and over. He succeeded C.M. Irvin as El Paso School Board president. At the time First Savings and Loan Association of El Paso was organized in 1957, Andress was elected secretary of the board of directors. He had served on various committees of the State Bar of Texas. He was active in the Asbury Methodist Church. 10 days ago, he was elected chairman of the El Paso County Hale-Aiken Committee for Study of the Country's School Systems, with findings to be presented to the legislature. So there you go. Ted Andress, the lawyer for Mr. Morrison and Brushy Bill Roberts, the prominent El Paso attorney that supported Brushy Bill's petition for pardon, was not a disreputable person. Morrison worked on this evidence for a year and a half and worked closely with Ted Andress. He also did his paralegal work, his probate work, and other cases with Lipscomb, Petticolas, Andress, and Fisk. I doubt many people know that. Now, I think this next letter to Brushy Bill is really the linchpin. Well, they're all linchpins. Look, he was Billy the Kid, guys. Yes, I'm willing to follow the evidence, academic integrity, but come on. At this point, the evidence shows there's no fraud, serious legal matter. People that knew Billy the Kid said Brushy was Billy the Kid. He knew things nobody else knew. He did have scars, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that showed he lived the life of an adventurer, not of a farmer. He knew Buffalo Bill Cody's people. and things about Wild West shows and all that he should have known. He knew intimate details about Fort Sumner and areas of New Mexico that he had never been to, supposedly. He knew there was a cave in the side of a mountain where you could get a horse in there, blah, 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 blah. He knew about the Mexican Revolution. He knew all this stuff, okay? And when you look at all the arguments of the people that use the same headlines that have been debunked over and over and over again, it's probably likely he was Billy the Kid. Now, that said, let's look at this letter from December 9th, 1950. As Mr. Morrison continues to focus on evidence and continues to focus on a serious legal matter, and he's going to go in front of Governor Ed Meacham as soon as he takes office in January, or he's going to try to. And here's what he says. Dear Bill, I hope that Travis, meaning DeWitt Travis, visits with you. He can give you the address of his sister in San Angelo. Since we have made things known, I believe that Miss Gamble's mother should help us. She knew the Maxwells very well, and she knew you when you stayed at her ranch after they said they had killed the kid. So again, they're now in the open, talking privately among themselves. They never dreamed these letters would be reviewed so closely 70 years later. This is not a fraud. I know I've said that a billion trillion times at this point, but he's speaking to his client, and he's saying that she knew you when you stayed at her ranch after they said they killed the kid. An affidavit from her would be very valuable in the establishing of your identity. Is the dentist who extracted your teeth still alive? I would like to have the x-rays as well as the teeth. I hope that you locate those teeth in your trunk. They are real evidence. We were certainly helpless in Santa Fe, but I promise we will never be placed in that position again. I intend to have more affidavits before we make another move. I want an opinion from a handwriting expert, x-ray examination, and report on your particular physical characteristics, that other book that you misplaced, and anything else that you may suggest. We are going to have indisputable evidence together with the indisputable records already in the file. I think that the governor gave little, if any, consideration to the evidence and records submitted with the petition. I think that the opinions of historians McKinney Garrett were ruling factors at the time of the show in Santa Fe. I promise there will be no more shows. And I know that the testimony of McKinney Garrett, etc., can be disqualified before a proper tribunal. Do not bother about anything until you recover. We have plenty of time. That's probably the saddest thing I've ever read in any of Mr. Morrison's letters, because they didn't have plenty of time. They had exactly 18 days after this before Brushy Bill Roberts would pass away. Here's hoping that you're improving, and with best wishes, your friend, Mr. Morrison. So now, here's what I think happened. Mr. Morrison visited Brushy Bill in Hyco, Texas, or Hamilton, Texas. And Brushy showed him the teeth in his trunk. He showed him the scarf. He showed him the old books. He showed him all that. I tend to think that when Brushy went in front of the governor, he destroyed all that stuff before he went, because he was scared he was going to be arrested. Now, I don't know. That's just total speculation. But afterwards, he's saying, I can't find this stuff. But I believe Mr. Morrison saw it when he was there. Now, could you say that Brushy Bill was a fraud and he had fooled Morrison into all this stuff, and then it was time to put up or shut up? He couldn't. You could say that. The evidence just doesn't support it. I mean, you've got DeWitt Travis, you've got all the other people that signed affidavits, you've got all the other stuff that Brushy knew, blah, 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 all the stuff we've already talked about. Okay, so here's another letter as Mr. Morrison continues to try to gather evidence, and he's going to reveal to this attorney kind of the methodology that he's using to try to prove identity. And I think this is interesting. So it's written on December 18th, 1950 to an attorney in Texas. And he's responding to this attorney saying, I've received your letter. And I guess in that letter, perhaps the attorney was saying, you can't just rely on, personal identification. Like, yeah, I saw him. Like, there's got to be more. And so Mr. Morrison says, we have not relied wholly upon personal identification of the claimant. We have photographs which have been compared with pictures of persons claiming to have photographs, tintypes, etc., of the kid during the period of time he was in New Mexico and Texas under the alias of William Bonney. We have handwriting of the kid as well as handwriting of the present claimant. Also, the claimant possesses the peculiar physical characteristics such as large wrists with small hands, small feet, high cheekbones, prominent nose, large ears, scars obtained in gun battles, and being about 5 feet 8 inches in height, weighing about 160 pounds, all of which was known to have been possessed by Billy the Kid. We believe that these facts constitute positive identification. I was informed recently by a man in El Paso that Mr. Smith was related to his family. He is taking up the matter with older members of his family. It is still our contention that Billy the Kid was not killed by Pat Garrett or anyone else, that he escaped from the gun battle in Fort Sumner that night and went into Old Mexico, that he is still living, and that our claimant is Billy the Kid, New Mexican outlaw of Lincoln County, New Mexico. My file is voluminous. If you're in the vicinity, I will be glad to go over my files with you. Yours very truly, Mr. Morrison. Okay, so hopefully this is interesting to you. And we're about to get into really the last days and final moments of Brushy Bill. We're going to talk about his heart attack. We're going to talk about the never before seen coroner's jury report of Brushy Bill, not the death certificate, the actual coroner's report. We're going to talk about the date on his headstone and how that got there and all this stuff. But first, I want to share this letter from December the 20th, 1950. And this again is Mr. Morrison writing to Brushy Bill. And he says, "Dear Billy, I talked to T.O. Sam Myers, an old timer and a prominent businessman here yesterday, and he made a comparison of the pictures in our case. He said that the man in the Jones group picture bears resemblance to all of ours. He pointed out distinctions that I had not noticed. Mr. Myers was born at Weatherford, Texas. He knew the Youngers, the Daltons, Frank James, C.C. Poole, and others of that era. He wants to talk to you. I played the recording for him. He is very much interested in our case, and I believe that his advice with his knowledge on guns will be beneficial to us. He does not believe the kid was killed by Garrett. Nobody ever questioned Pat Garrett. Yeah, okay. We are working on the theory that the man they killed carrying the little 41 double action pistol could not have been the kid. The kid had always carried large caliber single action pistols. The pistol that he surrendered to Garrett's posse in December of 1880 was a 44 single action Frontier model Colt. He was in jail from December 1880 until he killed the two guards in April 1881. Therefore, his favorite pistol was the 44 single action and not the little 41 double action that they took from the dead body in Fort Sumner. It is evident that he had access to the pistols that he had been accustomed to when he left the jail in April. The only logical conclusion would be that he picked up the 44 single actions with which to make his last stand. T.O. Sam's conclusion is the only logical one. Therefore, I am interested in what he has to say on the subject. When you recover, we will have the medical report and x-rays made. I promise there will not be any more sideshows and intimidation handed out to you as you sustained in Santa Fe. The governor has not returned our file yet. I hope to get it this week. Then we can go ahead next month. I hope you're improving. With your best wishes, your friend." Okay, so at the conclusion of the meeting with the governor's like, "Oh man, I got to keep this. This needs to go into the official record." He never returned Mr. Morrison's file. Now I'm going to show you another letter from almost an entire year later, after Brushy Bill dies, when Tom Mabry still has not returned the file to Mr. Morrison. And here's the letter. August 23, 1951. Honorable Thomas J. Mabry, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Honorable Sir, recently I made a trip to Santa Fe in an endeavor to locate my file in the matter of the petition for pardon filed in your office on November 15th, 1950, on behalf of William H. Roberts, alias William Bonney, alias Billy the Kid. I was advised yesterday by the Secretary of State that the file had never been received in that office. They made reference to the office of the governor, which office was unable to locate the file among the records. They referred me to Mr. Joe Bursey, who suggested I contact you in person since our meeting took place in your mansion on November 29, 1950. After you notified us that you would take no action on the petition, we made a request that you return the file to us unless it was to be made a matter of public record. Since it was not returned to us, it was presumed that it would be available for the purpose of obtaining copies thereof. At the present time, I am in urgent need of photostatic copies of some of the instruments contained therein. Would you please return it at your earliest convenience, you scumbag? Respectfully submitted, William V. Morrison. Okay, so the governor just kept it or threw it away or who knows. But in Mr. Morrison's files, I did hold and see and handle original copies of the sworn affidavits and stuff like that. I don't know if he had them remade. I have to look at the dates. They could have been remade. But yeah, according to this, Mabry kept his file or threw his file away, and it's not a matter of the public record, like he said. This dude didn't keep any of his promises. And if you want to find the frauds and the hoaxes, you can just look at this primary evidence and see it's all right here. All right. Now, if you've read my book, you know that right after Christmas, Brushy Bill writes to Mr. Morrison and says, I want to tell you how I got the name Bonnie. And he says, there's a little Mexican woman here who can write down, I want to dictate some notes. She's 25 cents an hour. Why don't I use this lady to do that? And Mr. Morrison writes back and says, hey, audio tape would be better. So just wait, I'll come see you and we'll get on audio tape. Well, obviously Brushy Bill died and they didn't get a chance to get it on audio tape. So unfortunately, it would have been great if he would have used a little Mexican girl to write down everything, but that didn't happen. But before he died, Brushy Bill wrote Morrison a second time and said, I want to tell you how I got the name Bonnie. Bell Star gave me the name. And so that's a fact unknown to history before I found this letter in Mr. Morrison's archive and revealed it in my book. The fact that William H. Bonney was an alias outlaw name. His real name, obviously, William H. Roberts. And when he was hanging with Bell Star, he was going to be an outlaw. He probably did do some outlaw stuff. And then, kind of was living that life. And then after New Mexico, he's like, all right, screw this. I'm going to get rid of the name William H. Bonney. I'm going to use, all the other aliases he used, Texas Kid, different things. But he admits that that was his outlaw name. Okay, so this is Mr. Morrison writing back to Brushy Bill. He says, dear friend, both of your letters received, and thank you for the clipping from the Dallas paper. The photographer had already left for New York before I received your letter. His picture story would have helped us in the matter. I don't want to hire anyone to write up your information. I plan to record everything that you have to say. I believe that is the best manner in which to preserve the facts. The recordings are more convincing than writings. Those other recordings are all right. I have not had the time to transcribe them yet. I want to visit with you as soon as you recover sufficiently to talk into the microphone. In the meantime, you can tell your wife to write the things as you recall them. I can read her handwriting. Yesterday, I talked to Mr. Andress and Mr. Peticolas, the attorneys, and we decided to ask for your permission to permit Life magazine to check the reports and evidence in the file in order to put the true facts before the reading public. So that's very interesting because they were talking to Life magazine at this point. And Life magazine wanted to do a big story on it. Prior to the governor, they wanted no publicity. But now that they had been maligned in the public, they're saying, well, we should at least use these people to check the evidence, do the true story, and get the facts before the reading public. So they're inviting scrutiny by Life magazine. Like, not the Inquirer, okay? Not like these tabloid magazines. Life magazine. They're inviting scrutiny. But wait a minute. What else did he just say? Yesterday, I talked to Mr. Andress and Mr. Peticolas, the attorneys, and we decided to ask for your permission to permit Life magazine to check the records and evidence in the file in order to put the true facts before the reading public. Wait, I thought they weren't Brushy Bill's lawyer, but they want his permission before they talk to Life magazine. Now, not only do you have Ted Andress, who you now know was extremely prominent in Texas and in El Paso, but you also have one of the other senior partners in the firm involved in this case. He's just a big hoax, and nobody ever questioned Garrett. Come on, man. Very few people have reached the level of accomplishment of a C.L. Sonneson, a Harry S. Truman, a William Vincent Morrison, a Ted Andress, or a Peticolas. Very few people. And I can even say the same would go for Governor Thomas J. Mabry. See? Try to be fair. But it is disingenuous and incorrect to pretend that one side is completely above reproach, especially when you're talking about Pat Garrett. Like, really? We know about Pat Garrett at this point. And to be honest, we know a little bit about Tom Mabry and how he responded to the corruption within his own administration. So again, these people that have been saying all this stuff for all these years are just wrong, and you should probably be ignoring them, in my humble opinion. We have no word from the governor. We wrote to him last week. I believe if we had publicized the issue a little, that Mabry would have been better acquainted with the whole matter. I had promised there would be no publicity until you gave the word. I believe that Meacham will consider all the records and the evidence before he makes any statements. I have confidence in him. Please let me know what to do with Life magazine. I shall abide by your decision. Here's hoping that you are improving, and with best wishes to both of you, I am your friend, William Morrison. Okay, so as we know, history often hangs on little nuances that go this way or that way. And had things gone just a little bit differently, we wouldn't be talking about this because it would have been resolved a long time ago. We now know Life magazine never did the article, Brushy Bill died, etc. And so I want to share this article with you. Billy the Kid is Hico heart victim. Hico, Texas. Brushy Bill Roberts died Wednesday with his boots on, and far from the frontier land he claimed that he roamed as Billy the Kid. The aged cowboy dropped dead of a heart attack as he walked the streets of Hico. He was dressed, as always, in a fringed frontier shirt, a cowboy hat, and boots. He was known here as O.L. Brushy Bill Roberts, but he claimed he was really Billy the Kid, the bold young desperado who has become an American legend. Governor T.J. Mabry of New Mexico recently refused Roberts' plea for a pardon as Billy the Kid. Roberts claimed the story of the kid's death at the hand of Sheriff Pat Garrett in Fort Sumner, New Mexico in 1881 was just a legend. The accepted story is that the kid, or William H. Bonney, was killed by Garrett in a rooming house. The man who died here told people he was 90 years old. He and his wife moved here from Gladewater, Texas, a dozen years ago. So, okay, Brushy Bill, we know after Christmas, his wife asks if he's well enough to go mail a letter. He gets up. A lot of you have maybe been to his house, and it's a decent walk to the Hico News Review where he ended up passing away. He's probably going to the post office, which is, I guess, around that area at the time. And he makes it all the way downtown, and he's walking up the sidewalk, and he falls dead of a heart attack. Now, for the first time, I'm going to share with you what happened based on eyewitness accounts in the coroner's report of Brushy Bill Roberts. And here it is. State of Texas, County of Hamilton. I, L.L. Hudson, Justice of the Peace, in and for Precinct, I think it says 3, Hamilton County, Texas, was called to the office of the Hico News Review in Hico, Texas at 1:05 p.m., December 27, 1950, to view the body of O.L. Brushy Bill Roberts, whose body had been found in the street immediately in front of the Hico News Review office, and took the following sworn testimony. O.W. McCoy, a resident of Iredell, Texas, testified that he saw Roberts leaning against an automobile just in front of the News Review office, seeing him crumple up and fall to the ground. Lawrence E. Tolliver of Route 2, Iredell, Texas, corroborated the above. Dr. W.F. Hafer testified that he had been attending Roberts and treating him for a heart ailment, and that in his opinion, Roberts was dead before he hit the ground from a coronary occlusion. As I mentioned before, Brushy Bill had a stroke at the governor's office brought about because of a coronary occlusion, according to Dr. W.F. Hafer, who had been attending Roberts and treating him for a heart ailment, and that in his medical opinion, Roberts was dead before he hit the ground from a coronary occlusion. What do I always say? These people, oh, how do we know Mr. Robert have a stroke? Also, call Miss Penelope Jones. She is a whiz at Bitcoin investing. She will make you millions of dollars. Yeah, these people are idiots. They have no idea what they're talking about. Brushy Bill Roberts had a stroke. His attending physician, Dr. W.F. Hafer, said he had a coronary occlusion. Sorry, facts. The finding of the Justice of the Peace is after viewing the body and considering the foregoing testimony, it is the judgment of the court that death was instantaneous, caused by an acute heart attack. L.L. Hudson, Justice of the Peace, Precinct 3, oh, so it is Precinct 3, Hamilton County, Texas, Hico, Texas, December 28th, 1950. I hereby certify that this is a true and correct copy of the verdict of the coroner rendered at the inquest over the body of O.L. Brushy Bill Roberts. signed LL Hudson, Justice of the Peace. And that, my friends, is how you properly do a coroner's report. So I don't think this has ever been shown before, but I hope you find that interesting. Okay, now for something that you probably have seen before, or a lot of people have seen before, which is Brushy Bill Roberts' death certificate. So as you can see, this is the Texas Department of Health Bureau of Vital Statistics Certificate of Death. Place of death occurred in Hamilton County. It was in Hyco, Texas. It says he stayed there 2 years, I guess. He was on West 2nd Street, and the name of the deceased was Ollie L. Roberts. I thought it was Oliver Pleasant Roberts, but he's got Oliver L. Roberts. He's a white male, married, who was born December 31st, 1868, according to this guy, who is Wayne Rutledge, the funeral director. Okay. He puts a birth date, December 31st, 1868. Now, Brushy said he was born December 31st, 1859. Of course, the Friends of the Santa Fe Ring Admiration Society will say he was born on Oliver Roberts' birthday in 1879, but it's not December 31st, it's something else. It says that he was 81 years, 11 months, and 26 days. He was retired. He was born in Taylor County, Texas. His father's name, unknown. Birthplace, unknown. Mother's maiden name, unknown. Birthplace, unknown. So they're putting as much as they've got on here, but they don't know a lot about Brushy Bill Roberts. They don't know if his father was deceased. They don't know his father's social security number, whatever. The person that gave him this information was Melinda Roberts, who spoke broken English, by the way, and who is Hispanic. And what did he die of? A coronary occlusion. Where did we hear that before? And then it says he dropped dead on the street. Dr. W.F. Hafer, Hyco, Texas, had been treating for hypertensive heart disease per testimony to coroner. Okay. So the doctor told the coroner, and there you go. This was made on December 29th, 1950, stamped by the Texas Department of Health and signed by LL Hudson, who was the coroner, and then also W. Wayne Rutledge, who's the funeral director. Okay, now I'm about to take you in a whole nother direction I don't think you're going to see coming, but hey, if you do, you're very smart. We've already established that Mr. Morrison thought he had plenty of time. I'll get your story, no problem, whatever. He's over in New Mexico and El Paso or wherever. Brushy Bill's in Hyco, Texas. He's going to get all of his information. He's writing people. He's a Brushy, find those teeth. When you get better, we're going to do some x-rays and all this stuff. We got plenty of time. Guess what? You don't have plenty of time. Brushy's dead. Mr. Morrison obviously would have felt horrible at that point. He would have felt panicked. He would have felt horrible. I don't know how I would have responded, but what Mr. Morrison does is he immediately goes to be by Brushy's side. Okay. And we now know that he's going to continue to push for a pardon for Brushy Bill, even though he's dead. But it was very important at this moment when he probably didn't know what was going to happen. He can't go forward maybe with Life magazine. The guy's not available to be interviewed. He can't take him to more old timers who can validate his identity. What should he do? Well, what he does do is he goes to Hyco, Texas, and he takes photos of the body. Now, in my other video, you'll see me talking to Mr. Morrison's daughter, who's in her 90s, and she says that dad took photos of the body. And I said, oh man, I'd love to see that, right? So we know that Mr. Morrison took photos of the body. I don't know where they're at. I don't have them, but he took photos of the body. The other thing he did is he asked that guy, W. Wayne Rutledge, the funeral director, to sign a sworn affidavit. And I have that affidavit, and I'm going to show you what it says. But first, let's establish, because people like evidence, and I don't blame you, that Mr. Morrison took photos of the body, like his daughter told me, in her living room years ago. And here's an article from the 29th of December, 1950, the same day of the death certificate of Billy the Kid, Brushy Bill Roberts. The Amarillo Daily News says, check scars on body of man who claimed to be Billy the Kid. Hyco, Texas, December 28th. An El Paso lawyer thought he was a salesman. Thought he was a used car salesman or some kind of traveling salesman. Nope. According to Amarillo Daily News, an El Paso lawyer headed today for the Central Texas town to make a note of the scars and markings on the body of an old cowboy who insisted he was Billy the Kid. Now, hold on a second. People make a lot of hay out of, well, you guys say Brushy had the same scars. What scars did Billy have? And how do we know Brushy Bill had scars? Okay, I get we really don't know what scars Billy the Kid had. He was wounded when he ran into the street to get his pistol back off the body of Sheriff Brady. Whatever, whatever, whatever. There's a lot of stories. How do we really know? I think the point is better understood as why would this farmer have bullet wounds, knife scars, 27 or however many Mr. Morrison put in his book? Why would he have all these battle scars? Because there's a difference. And yes, scars fade over time. So how do we know that's a scar from a bullet? How do we know? Whatever. Brushy Bill said that he had a bullet lodged in his calf, right? That was never taken out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But people say, well, there's no evidence he had any scars. So if you were Mr. Morrison and you're a big fraud and you had just been humiliated in front of the governor and now your guy's dead, would you run to Heiko and take pictures and tell everybody, hey, everybody, we should get a record of these scars before Brushy Bill is gone? We need to make sure that we document these scars, that in fact he did have scars, and yes, they're there. Everybody, hey, world, put it in the newspaper. We need to check and get records of these scars. Who's pushing for that? William Vincent Morrison, the lawyer from El Paso who took Brushy Bill to the governor. He's the one saying, hey, we need to check the scars because there's scars. He has scars. This tells you that Brushy Bill had scars. An El Paso lawyer headed today for the Central Texas town to make a note of the scars and markings on the body of an old cowboy who insisted he was Billy the Kid. O.L. Brushy Bill Roberts died on a Heiko street yesterday afternoon. He came to the end of the trail just as he wanted to with his boots on. Ally William A. Morrison said he wanted to examine the markings on Robert's body and talk with the old man's widow, Brushy Bill's only survivor, who actually thought he was Billy the Kid. His own family thought he was Billy the Kid. He must be Billy the Kid. His own family thought he was. Say it the right way. Morrison recently represented Roberts at Santa Fe when the aged cowboy asked General Thomas J. Mabry to grant him a pardon so that he could die a free man. The New Mexico governor declined to honor the petition, and when informed today of Roberts' death, said, quote, I'm still thoroughly convinced he was not the man he claimed to be. Well, F you, man. This guy's a jackass. I'm so sorry to hear of his passing. I'm still not convinced he was the guy he said he was. Frick off. You're irrelevant to history, buddy. I don't like this guy at all. Hiding the petition for pardon, like, frick off. Mabry remained politely skeptical. Plus, we never got into the corruption that was rife in Mabry's administration. The chief of police, state troopers, torturing prisoners, getting indicted, getting convicted, which means it was found to be true, and Mabry wouldn't fire the bad cop who was leading his administration. No wonder New Mexico's got so many problems. They've been doing this stuff for 140 years. I'm sure it's not that way today. Mabry remained politely skeptical when Roberts claimed that one of his cronies, and not William Bonney, was slain by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881 at Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And Mabry arched a gubernatorial eyebrow. I hate how they write this stuff. And Mabry arched a gubernatorial eyebrow when Roberts gave information that conflicted with the legend woven around the fabulous outlaw. Roberts says that he was born in Buffalo Gap, Texas. William Bonney was born in New York. Yeah, okay, whatever. Not according to Fred Nolan. Nor could the old gentleman remember any details, blah, blah, whatever. Robert's age was another question. In 1941, he told friends he was 72. Recently, old Brushy claimed he was 90. The old man's last extended trip was made last year when he visited New York to investigate whether an aged, bedridden man was a real bandit. Roberts came back to Heiko, convinced that the ailing, this guy sucks. Who wrote this? Aging centenarian Frank Dalton was telling the truth. Even though most Heiko townspeople did not believe Roberts was Billy the Kid, they loved and respected him. He always appeared on the streets in his red leather fringed jacket, dungarees, 10-gallon hat, and boots. Often he appeared in parades. Brushy Bill lived in an austere fashion. I don't drink in no shape, form, or fashion. He once told R.I. Hollard, editor of the Heiko News Review, nor do I dip, chew, nor smoke. Yet I don't claim to be sanctified, although I try to lead a moral life. Couple quick side notes, because man, I'm talking fast. Brushy Bill apparently became a born-again Christian in the Missionary Baptist Church, I believe in Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. So that's interesting when he's talking about being sanctified. It's kind of a technical Christian term if you're into that kind of thing. So that's interesting. The other thing is there's a lot of people today like, oh, I remember Brushy Bill as a kid. He was always telling everybody he's Billy the Kid. I don't believe it. Don't believe it for a second. I'm not calling these people liars. Spent a lot of time in Heiko. My film was premiered in Heiko, the Emilio Estevez film we did. I've been to Heiko many times as a guest of honor with Barry Corbin and other people. I love Heiko. Heiko's amazing. But I do have people every now and then come up to me and say, yeah, I met him and he used to always talk about being Billy the Kid. I don't believe you. I love you. Sorry. But it really just one or two people over the many years, decade or so I've been going to Heiko that says, oh yeah, I met him when I was little and he used to always tell people he was Billy the Kid. I think that's a false memory. I don't think that's true. There's a lot of other evidence that he actually never told anybody that. He would say he was a cowboy. He would say he wrote in the Buffalo Bill Cody show. He never said he was Billy the Kid. So whatever. I don't put any more stock in that than I do in the Henry Anthony story that he was a, U.S. Marshal and he said, I know you, Billy Bonney, and he pulled his gun on Billy. It's interesting. Yeah, it's probably true. I don't know, but those are hearsay anecdotal stories, not hard proof. So I don't put a lot into that stuff, either when it's good or when it's bad. It's not a proper way of evaluating evidence, in my opinion. But let's get to the sworn affidavit, never before seen, of W. Wayne Rutledge, the funeral director who prepared Brushy Bill for burial. And this says, before me, the undersigned authority on this day personally appeared Mr. W. Wayne Rutledge, Heiko, Hamilton County, Texas, who upon his oath deposes and says that his name is W. Wayne Rutledge, residing in Hamilton County, Texas, being of lawful age, and he is a member of the firm of Barrow and Rutledge Funeral Establishment with offices in the aforementioned county and state. This affiant further states that he took charge of the body of one deceased, O.L. Roberts, on or about 1:00 p.m. on December 27, 1950, preparing it for burial, that on or about December 29th, 1950, this affiant, accompanied by William V. Morrison, made a general inspection of the said body, making the following notes. There appeared a scar about 2 inches in length above the top of the head, within a couple inches distant from the front forehead, one scar about 1 inch in length across the back of the right hand and near the knuckle joints, one scar inside of shin of right leg at a point about halfway between the knee and the ankle, one scar inside of the kneecap on the left leg, 2 scars inside of shin on the left leg near the lower part of the leg, all of said above mentioned scars being readily discernible. The body measured 5 feet 8 inches in height, weighing 165 pounds. The feet measured 9 inches in length from the large toe to the bottom of the heel. Wrists measured 7 inches in diameter across the joint. The hands were small with well-shaped fingers. The ears were large, with the left ear protruding further away from the head than the right ear. The nose was long and straight with high cheekbones. The body appeared to be in better physical condition than that of a man of less advanced years. This affiant further states that the above-mentioned facts are true and set forth, and as they purport to be, further affiant says nothing. Okay, now, this is extremely interesting to me for many reasons. First of all, that's not that many scars. In Alias Billy the Kid, Mr. Morrison said that he added up 26 scars from bullets and knives. He says one crossed the back of the right hand just behind the knuckles, and there was another across the first joint of the trigger finger on the same hand. Then he gives some quotes about how Brushy says he emptied this one once and then he had to pull that one, whatever. And he says his left hand was never hit because there wasn't a man alive that could beat him with that left. So Morrison doesn't get into too much more detail. He does talk about a bullet that's lodged in his calf. He does talk about how he was clipped through the side, the hip, whenever he ran out into the street. So he gives a little bit of detail, but he certainly doesn't list 26 scars from bullets and knives. But that's what he went on the public record with in his book, Alias Billy the Kid. And I want to try to just stick to the facts here for a second. What I just mentioned is a fact that Mr. Morrison went on the record with the number 26 scars from bullets and knives, right? We just talked about how it was this same Mr. Morrison who wanted to rush down to Heiko, Texas, before Brushy Bill went in the ground, go to the funeral home, and take photos of the body to make sure that he could document, I suppose, the 26 scars from knives and bullets, right? Mr. Morrison did that. And it just seems strange to me that you would do that if you made up the 26. So fact number one, he went public with the number 26. Fact number two, it's documented he went to take photos of the body to document the scars. We have that corroborated from multiple sources. There's multiple newspaper accounts, and Morrison's own daughter told me that to my face. Number three, he prepared this affidavit for the coroner to sign, and he lists only these few scars that are in this affidavit. That's a fact. How does that make any sense? We also know that in a letter to Brushy Bill, he says that he had an agreement with the coroner to sign an affidavit, and that the coroner then went back on his agreement and refused to sign the affidavit. So those are kind of the four facts that I know. But let's stick on the first three for just a second. But why would you go public with 26? Take photos of the body and then write up an affidavit that doesn't say 26. What sense does that make? Well, I can only think of one thing. And I'll admit, this speculation is influenced by the fourth fact that we know, that W. Wayne Rutledge decided not to sign the affidavit. Just for fun, I'll throw in a fifth fact. Scars do fade over time. And so my speculation is that as Mr. Morrison is trying to review the scars on the body, that there is disagreement between he and the coroner around what constitutes a scar and what doesn't constitute a scar. That's one possibility. And so Mr. Morrison, since he can't come to agreement on the majority of the scars, settles for what the guy will agree to. Will you at least give me that that's a scar? Okay, yeah, that looks like a scar. I'll agree to that. How about that one? Is that a scar? Yeah, okay, I'll give you that one because that one's pretty obvious. I could see that happening. I could see the negotiation going that way. And then I could see Mr. Morrison probably reluctantly saying, well, I'll take what I can get. At least I'll have that. I've got my photos, etc. So he writes it up, takes it to the guy, and the guy says, you know what? I'm not even going to agree to those. I don't want those either. I'm not going to sign anything. I don't have to. Why should I if I don't have to? Again, a lot of people don't want to get involved. Now, let's use some common sense. We've already established that this was a serious legal matter brought forth by some of the most reputable people in the country at the time it was brought forth. And so I think the most logical explanation, based on all of the evidence and the facts, is exactly what I just said. I think Mr. Morrison went to document things. He tried to get corroboration from the coroner. The coroner didn't want to play along. He tried to compromise. Compromise didn't work either. So this affidavit was never signed. It went into Mr. Morrison's file, and he probably forgot about it. Now, there is that photo of Brushy Bill in his coffin. And I wonder if that photo is one of the photos that Mr. Morrison took. If it is, where are the rest of them? I don't know. But what do I always say? My job is to follow the evidence, and I'm going to share that evidence with you, whether it's for Brushy Bill or against Brushy Bill, because I really don't care one way or the other. I just have a thing where I don't like to be lied to. And I especially don't like to be lied to by people of low moral character. There's just something about it that strikes me the wrong way. I also don't like people bad-mouthing Mr. Morrison, and I do think that Brushy Bill Roberts wanted to die a free man. His story resonated with me, and as I looked into it, it did seem as though he was treated very unfairly, and I'm continuing to show evidence of that as time goes by. Okay, so I think personally that this is an affidavit Mr. Morrison came up with to compromise with the guy and say, okay, well, can we agree at least on these 6 or 7 or however many are in there? The guy wouldn't sign it. It's like, okay, whatever. I really would like to have the photos. I don't have the photos. Maybe one day we will. All right, so let me share with you another thing that is used against Brushy Bill, which is his original headstone. It says Ollie L. Roberts. The S in Roberts is backwards. It says Brushy Bill, which is backwards. It says he's born 12/31, 1868, died 12/27, 1950. Now, I just showed you the death certificate where it says his wife, Melinda Roberts, gave that birth date, right? According to them. And that's fine. He She was like his third or fourth wife, and he is always lying about his age. So I don't think that proves anything. I do think it's interesting that she knew his birthday was December 31st. So that's interesting. But here's a letter from Mr. Morrison's files that explains how that headstone came to be. And this handwriting appears to be from Brushy Bill's wife. And it's hard to read, but it says, Mr. Morrison, that was a block of cement. It says SUMENT. I think it's cement put to Bill's grave. Here is what is written on it. Ollie Roberts, Brushy Bill, 12/31, 1868, 12/27, 1950. This was on that cement block, I guess. Jack Malone put that there. So this headstone that everybody says, ha ha, his original headstone said, 1868, and it was a real crappy, block. Some guy named Jack Malone did that. And it wasn't sanctioned by Brushy Bill's family, his wife, or Mr. Morrison or anybody else. He thought he was doing a nice thing. So he went out there and he took a block of concrete and he wrote in it with a stick and put it on Brushy's grave. This is another thing nobody knows. That's never been revealed. It's only in Mr. Morrison's papers. You can see my hand holding it as I'm going through the papers and taking copies of everything. But there you go. That's where Brushy Bill's original tombstone came from. There's a guy named Jack Malone in the community that I guess liked Brushy Bill, was friends with Brushy Bill, was trying to help him out by giving him a headstone. Later, they took away the unauthorized headstone and they put up a different headstone. And then now you know what it is today, which is this headstone at the cemetery. Okay, so we've covered a whole lot of ground in the last days and final moments of Brushy Bill Roberts. And my hope is that as we continue to gather primary evidence, we will correct the mistakes of the past. There's an old saying, the truth will come out and the truth will set you free. I don't know that we're going to set anybody free, but the truth will definitely come out and the truth is coming out. The other thing we continue to reveal is how you and I have been lied to for 70 years. But what's happened is the public is responding to what they recognize to be obvious truth. The more they learn about Brushy Bill, the more they believe him. And I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of this stuff that's never before been seen and hearing some of this information. We're going to continue to press on. I got a lot more to share, but the rest of what I share is probably going to be in other videos that won't be dedicated to the last days and final moments of Brushy Bill. So I want to end with an anecdotal story that I don't know if it's true. So this has no weight whatsoever. I just thought it was interesting. But there was a guy in Hico whose dad, I think, owned the barber shop. And so when he was a little boy, he would sit in the barber shop and he would, play marbles or whatever you do when you're a little kid. And he said every year a limousine would pull up in downtown Hico and Brushy Bill would come around the corner and get in the limousine and take off. And it always stuck out to him because you never saw a limousine like that in Hico, Texas. So his dad asked Brushy Bill about it one time and said, why are you getting into that limo? And he said, oh, I'm going to a rodeo. And so every year this limo would come and pick him up and take him to rodeos. And there are records of Brushy Bill being in parades and being in rodeos and different things. And every time he would come back from one of these things, he would have brand new clothes. So whoever was picking him up and taking him to these things would deck him out in Western clothes. And then he'd come back, he'd have brand new clothes. Now he's poor, living in poverty, but once a year he'd go off to rodeos, come back, and he's got a new outfit. So the kid said one year the limo pulls up and the door opens and Brushy Bill starts walking down the street to get in the door. And the little kid peeked in to see who's in the limo. And he said Roy Rogers was in the limo. Now, was it really Roy Rogers, or is it this little kid thinking it was Roy Rogers? But apparently, according to this anecdotal story, right there around the spot where Brushy Bill took his final breath and died on the street in 1950 is where Roy Rogers would come every year, pick up Brushy Bill, take him to parades, take him to rodeos, buy him new clothes. And that's why in the photos of Brushy Bill, you see him always dressed in the finest Western clothing. Thanks for listening.